The House voting today to file a lawsuit against the president's executive order declaring a national emergency at the southern border. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying, quote, the president's sham emergency declaration and unlawful transfer of funds have undermined our democracy. With me now, Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy. Senator, thanks for joining us. This was the tactic that the Democrats used, of course, for most of last year, early this year. Subsequently, though, what the American public has seen, what the world has seen, is a crisis of the magnitude that everyone acknowledges is an emergency.
I agree with that totally. The president speaks both of the drugs. He's previously spoken of the human trafficking and obviously of the folks coming in caravans from Central America. It is an emergency. It is a crisis. I think we need to all be on board in terms of staunching this flow, if you will.
Sir, other than lawsuits and finger pointing, isn't this the ultimate opportunity for both sides of the aisle to say, hey, let's come together, maybe, come up with the ultimate solution, put everything on the table once and for all, and get it resolved? Now is the moment where everyone's watching what's happening down there, and everyone, to a degree, is ashamed that we haven't fixed this yet.
I agree with that premise. I'm not sure everyone, though, would. Keep in mind, some on the left wish to abolish ICE. They wish to have open borders. Now, I would like to think, Charles, that everybody is on the same page on this, but everyone is not. That said, your point is well taken. There's been money appropriated. There's been programmatic programs put into motion. We need to obviously allow those to go as expeditedly as possible, but I do think there's more, and this would be a great time for Democrats to decide to cooperate with Republicans.
With respect to President Trump potentially closing the border, where do you stand right now on there?
I think that could be counterproductive in the sense that right now our caravans are coming from Central America. But what we've learned is that in terms of Mexico, it's not from Mexico. And when you ask the Mexicans why not, they say the economic development that has occurred in the northern part of Mexico gives us stickiness. Despite the violence, Mexicans stay in Mexico because there's economic opportunity. I don't want to thwart that economic opportunity that has addressed the issue of Mexican immigration as we attempt to staunch the flow from Central America.
So I want to change course here because a big news story this week, of course, is President Trump saying that your party will address replacing Obamacare after the election. Where are we right now with respect to improving our health care system, a topic that right now resonates as the #1 in this country?
Yeah, I've got about, maybe as many as 10 different bipartisan bills that would benefit everybody no matter what your health care. For example, price transparency helps the person on Medicare as well as the person with commercial insurance. Lowering drug prices helps the person who is on Medicaid because taxpayers pay less. I could go on. Republicans clearly have a vision. It is to give power to the patient. I would argue the Democrats have a vision, and that is to have power over the patient, requiring them to give up their commercial insurance to go to Medicare for all. So there will be that debate going forward. In the meantime, we lay the foundation for success after 2020.
Senator Cassidy, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Trump and powerful establishment globalist forces are, in the U.S. southern border. The radical DEMS, Rhino Republicans, the establishment of both parties, K Street and Wall Street, all in full-out assault against President Trump and our national sovereignty. These groups demand the president capitulate to their demands of open borders, open migration, and to preserve their status quo. Their status quo. The president saying his threats to shut down the border are paying off and that Mexico is already paying attention.
So if we don't see people apprehended and brought back to their countries, if we see these massive caravans coming up to our country right through Mexico, coming right through Mexico like nothing, buses are even given to them. For the last 3 days it hasn't happened since I said we're closing the border.
We're at a pivotal moment and uncertain moment, certainly, in our nation's history. And history is always made when outcomes are far from certain. We are fortunate, blessed to have a president who was made for such times. Joining me tonight to take up the president's bold leadership in the wake of the national emergency at our southern border, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. Tom, good to have you with us. This is an extraordinary moment, in part because all of these forces arrayed against the president are now public. and publicly battling him. They're battling against the interest of national security and indeed the interest of the nation, and in favor of their own. Your thoughts?
You know, this is a remarkable time in the sense, at least the president, for the first time in a generation, we have a president who's talking sensibly about solving the border crisis. What's remarkable is, given the crisis, the existential threat that's at the border right now, the lack of action here in Washington, D.C. to deal with it other than out of the White House. And it shows you that the left, and as you point out, the establishment Republicans don't see this as a crisis. They see it as an opportunity. They're happy to have it go on. They're happy to have the system broken to, again, allow for open borders ultimately and a mass amnesty for those here illegally. That's the goal here. So it isn't a question of what type of security we have at the border. It's a question of whether we're going to have an open border and a massive amnesty. And, you know, in my view, the president needs to take a much more aggressive tack on the border in the sense of deploying the military on the border to secure our interests there. And they can make sure commercial traffic that is legitimate continues to flow back and forth. But they will secure the border in places our civilian personnel have been unable to do. And of course there are other reforms that the DHS can undertake that they really are incapable of undertaking absent presidential direction. That he should be pushing them back with. Look, and the other dirty little secret is the Mexican government doesn't control large swaths of its territory. The border region with the United States is not controlled by the Mexican government. It's controlled by the drug cartels. And the president's considering this, and he should pull the trigger and label these cartels for what they are, foreign terrorist organizations, which will allow a whole host of other activity be used against them to protect our interests.
Yeah, the president has been preeminent, foremost, in bringing national attention to the opioid crisis, the tens of thousands of American deaths every year that result, and all of those drugs, the majority of methamphetamine, marijuana, cocaine, fentanyl, you name it, come across that border. All under, of course, the auspices of the major drug cartels of Mexico, which has made Mexico the murder capital of the world, for crying out loud. Right. And this president is the only president in my lifetime to have said directly and forthrightly that the drug cartels will be defeated in this battle.
Well, that's right. And, you know, in many ways, the border isn't even at the border with Mexico, Texas, and California, and Arizona, and such. Our border, effectively, is between Mexico and Guatemala. I mean, that's where the battle is. That's where it needs to be stopped. And if the Mexican
I wish that were more true, Tom. I take your point. But those people dying are in this country. Those people who are living with the violence committed by illegal immigrants are in this country.
Well, the cartels use these people from Guatemala and Honduras and elsewhere as a vehicle to get those drugs into the country. We have to stop the flows, the human trafficking operations, and the drug flows are contingent on these human trafficking operations. As our Border Patrol is shut down, dealing with hundreds of these so-called family units, elsewhere the drugs are coming in unimpeded. So we've got to deploy the military to take care of this. Our civilian personnel have been overwhelmed, and the history of our country, at least with Mexico, is that where the military ordinarily has been protecting the border. It's an outlier recently. The recent civilian control of the border is an outlier historically in our dealings with Mexico.
Yeah, in talking with White House sources today, there is no doubt that a plan for a more aggressive approach to turn the tide that they certainly recognize better than anyone that is working against the national interests and against the American people. They are building that right now.
And go ahead. And the attack is simultaneous. It's going on at the border. The establishment is allowing this to take place, and then you've got the fights here in Washington, where the effort to remove and overthrow the president is being enabled and continuing out of Congress in allegiance with the Mueller operation. You know, our republic is on the brink these days, folks.
And this president is the only president. I think this is correct. Since Andy Jackson to stand up and campaign directly against a corrupt establishment, a deep state, and they are fighting back with everything they have, and it's in public view now in this battle, as I said at the outset, to determine the future of the nation. I want to turn to one of the most frustrating aspects for the Border Patrol and all responsible for border security, and that's the catch and release program. Do you have thoughts about what can be done to fix that forthwith?
Well, the Border Patrol can be enabled to consider asylum claims. That can speed it up. One of the things that's happening at the border, my understanding, is they just let people in. They process as many as possible in a day, and of course the system is overwhelmed. But if you know you have only so many beds or so much capacity to detain these fraudsters, then you shut down the border once you reach the daily limit. Right. If you only have room for 2 more people to come in through a particular border point, you shut it down. These asylum laws can be enforced, but they're not a suicide pact, and that's why the president should direct the DHS to manage the border better. It's not happening. DHS is doing yeoman's work in many respects, but they're unimaginative in dealing with the crisis, and this is where the president needs to bring his special outlook, because frankly he's a one-man show in terms of this being entrepreneurial and figuring out solutions and taking advantage of a different approach that the deep state and the establishment, even good thinking people here in Washington, can't think through.
Yeah, I want to turn. I can't have you here without talking to you about this. The New York Times resurrecting anonymous sources to bring this business about Barr misinterpreting the Mueller report. Yeah, I've given sort of my reaction to the idea of the Times' use of anonymous sources for this kind of spurious nonsense. Your thoughts about the Times reporting and whatever, if there is any substance to that you discerned in that report?
Well, Barr blew up the conspiracy of the Mueller people to smear the president through this report. They weren't expecting Barr to be effective and efficient in analyzing the report, seeing through the gamesmanship with the obstruction of justice, and getting the key details out to the American people. So they're angry about that. They were hoping the report would be put. That's right. And so they've got this dossier, especially related to the smears related to obstruction, that they want the House Democrats to use to try to overthrow and impeach the president. Please. And so this is all the spin related to that.
This is appalling. It is such drivel. It is unworthy of whatever the Times once was. And the DEMS have exposed them for themselves for what they are. And that is nasty, vicious, venomous, anti-Trump activists who have no other purpose, apparently, in their political lives. You get the last word real quickly, please.
I want Mr. Mueller, I want Mr. Weissman, I want the rest to testify. One thing I want to know is why, once they figured out there was no Russia collusion a year ago, they let this hang over the president and hold back this report, seemingly to help the Democrats win in November.
Because, Tom, it was their purpose from the outset.
Amen.
It was, after all, as you know, a witch hunt. Tom, thanks so much. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
You
Tom
too.
Fitton, Judicial Watch.